Welcome back, everyone, to Season 3, Episode 5 of Core Concepts. We are back with another conversation on hamartiology.
Which is a fancy theologian word for the study of sin. Last week, we covered the origin and basic definition of sin.
We said that sin is disobedience to God, but it's more than that.
Yeah, it's also not trusting God.
And it's also thinking that we can judge for ourselves what is right and wrong.
Yeah. Today, we're going to take a look at the results of the first sin of humanity. We call that event in the garden when Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the forbidden tree, the fall.
And from that point on, humanity and all of creation are shattered by the effects of sin.
Wait, hang on. Why should Adam and Eve's choice to sin affect me or creation? Like, I didn't do that.
That's a great question. So that question has been discussed from a whole lot of angles, and we have a handful of theological terms that have been used over the years to try and make this understandable.
But first, Romans 5:12 says, "Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned."
So that long clause shows us the Bible teaches that sin came into the world through Adam.
And it goes further than that and tells us that Adam's sin condemned all humanity and made us sinners.
Right. So Romans 5:18 and 19 says, "Therefore, as one trespass led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men. For as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous."
Okay, so Adam's sin condemned us, and Adam's disobedience made us sinners. Why though? Like I wasn't there, man.
Well, we've got some words we use to help understand how Adam's sin is connected to the rest of humanity. The first is headship.
Oh, okay. That's the idea that a person can hold a role of authority and responsibility for a group and act as a representative for them.
Right. So an easy example might be thinking about a foreign diplomat who goes to another country and greatly offends the rulers there, right? You can understand that the consequences for that one ambassador's actions would impact the entire international relationship between the two parties.
Okay, but what makes Adam my authoritative representative? I didn't vote for him.
Well, he's your father. He's our father. He's the father of us all. At the time, he was the only man in existence. That kind of makes him a fitting representative for all men, all humanity.
I guess, but I don't like it. Like, why can't I represent myself before God? What if I don't want Adam's sin to apply to me?
I get that. But let's think that through a bit. First off, have you ever sinned voluntarily?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I've committed plenty of my own sins and nobody was forcing me to.
Romans 2:6 says that God will render to each one according to his works. So we've got plenty of our own sin to account for, and God is going to deal with each of us justly.
All right, well, that makes sense, but why can't I just represent myself?
Well, play that out, man. Like, imagine you were the first human. You're in the garden. That one tree is a no-no. Would you eat from it? Do you really think you would have done better than Adam or Eve for all eternity?
I mean, I struggle at Thanksgiving to not eat too much pumpkin pie,
Okay.
so I guess I would have failed too.
So, and here's the worst part. If you give up this idea of headship, let's say you just throw it away.
Okay.
No one can represent you. No one
Good.
can take your place.
I like that.
You sink or swim on your own merits. You're not just throwing away Adam. Who else are you throwing away?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I'd have to give up Jesus.
How's that sound?
No, that's terrible. No thanks. I want Jesus to represent me.
Then Adam stays.
Okay.
So read those verses from Romans again.
Okay, Romans 5:18-19 says, "Therefore, as one trespass led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men. For as by the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience the many will be made righteous."
Jesus is a second Adam, the new representative. And when he represents us, his righteousness counts as ours. We are saved.
That's awesome. Okay, so Adam's sin has impacted everything because he is our representative, our head.
Right. Now, let's talk about the specifics of that impact on humanity and then on creation.
Okay, first, humanity. Another set of terms we use in this discussion is original sin and original guilt.
Yeah, you're probably familiar with those phrases, but since you've heard those terms thrown around, but maybe not defined, right? Let's define them.
Okay. In his book, Systematic Theology, Wayne Grudem explains what we mean by original sin, saying, quote, "It should be remembered that the sin spoken of does not refer to Adam's first sin, but to the guilt and tendency to sin with which we are born. It is original in that it comes from Adam, and it is also original in that we have it from the beginning of our existence as persons, but it is still our sin, not Adam's sin, that is meant."
It's easy when we hear original sin to think way back to the first sin of Adam, but what that phrase is actually referring to is the impact that that first sin has had on us.
Yeah. Original sin is not an event from Adam's lifetime. It's a condition we are all born with.
It comes from our father Adam, true, but it's now in us.
Yeah.
And this condition means two things. We are born bent towards sin, and we are born with the guilt of sin.
Okay, bent towards sin, born with the guilt of sin. What does that mean?
So think about someone who is born with a deadly disease, right? Right off the bat, this disease is going to claim their life, which is just awful and sad.
And so that's like being born with the guilt of sin?
Right. Because according to Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death.
And we are all born under the curse of sin. That's what we mean by being born with the guilt of sin.
And 1 Thessalonians 1:9 talks about God judging sinners, saying they will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction coming from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his might.
Yikes. So being born with the guilt of sin is like being born with a deadly disease. We're going to die. Got it. That's heavy.
Yeah. So what about being born bent towards sin, right? How does this disease analogy help us here?
Yeah, if you're born with a deadly disease, it's going to impact your life, your day-to-day living. The health of your body will change what you're able to achieve, commit to, how much energy you have, even your mood and your temper.
Okay, yeah. So not only am I going to die, but my whole life is altered and affected by my health situation.
Yeah, and that's what we mean by having a bent toward sin. From the moment we are born, our whole lives are altered, even down to our day-to-day thoughts and actions.
Jeremiah 17:9 says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick."
Yeah, our internal emotions and desires are all messed up by our sinful condition.
1 Corinthians 2:14 says, "The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned."
Yeah. So the sinful condition even impacts our thoughts and our minds.
And this isn't default humanity, right? This is not how God created us. He made us to bear his image well.
But humanity's first sin has bent all of us away from being good image bearers of God and toward resistance of God and even rebellion from him.
Have you ever wondered why sin sometimes seems so effortless and obeying God seems so difficult?
It's because we've got this sinful nature now. We've been corrupted to our core. Even when we want to obey God, it's a fight.
The Apostle Paul describes this struggle in his letters, often referring to the flesh.
Yeah, when he says the flesh, he's talking about all of the desires of our hearts and bodies that long for sin rather than obedience.
While talking about the fight, that specific fight in Romans 5:15, Paul says, "For I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate."
This is where the struggle comes from. We've inherited it from Adam.
Before we move on, let's clarify something about this word guilt.
Yeah, when theologians talk about humanity being born with original guilt, they're not talking about personal guilt. You are not personally guilty of sin at birth.
Right. Rather, it's a collective guilt that all humanity shares because of our representative, Adam. He began a rebellion on behalf of all humanity.
And even though we haven't personally sinned yet at birth, we are united to our father Adam's guilt and his rebellion, and so the curse of death is on us, even as innocent newborns.
So original sin means we are born with the guilt of sin under the curse of death, and that we are born with a bent toward sin. But earlier, we said that humanity's sin has also impacted creation. How's that?
Yeah. So the sin of humanity did not just corrupt man, but creation too.
The first bits of this can be seen right after the fall in Genesis 3, when God curses the ground. No longer will it be easy for mankind to work the land, but it would be toil, full of sweat and pain and thorns.
Yeah. And childbirth became increasingly painful in Genesis 3 as well. The natural way things were meant to function became a burden and a chore rather than something that just beautifully flowed naturally.
Romans 8:20 and 21 says, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God."
So the earth, the weather, the tectonic plates, the sea, bacteria and lions, asteroids and the sun, all of creation have been impacted by the sin of humanity.
Right. It's hard to imagine that devastating earthquakes and destructive hurricanes were a design feature of God's original paradise.
Rather, the chaos, death, destruction, and suffering we see in nature is actually a result of creation itself bearing the weight and burden of our sin.
But why? Why would creation, which, can't sin, right? Why does it bear Adam's sin?
Like you've been telling me. Headship. What did God give humanity in the very beginning?
He gave Adam and Eve dominion over all the earth. He made them co-rulers with him.
And so their sin has entered everything under their rule and dominion.
Wow. All right, friends, we hope that this episode has given you a better understanding of sin and why the world is the way it is, and even why your heart and mind are the way that they are.
As our head, Adam's sin has passed to us.
At birth, we bear the guilt of sin.
At birth, we are bent towards sin.
And all of creation has been thrown out of whack by sin.
So what does this all mean practically for me?
Well, first, this reinforces a biblical idea. Number one, death is our enemy.
Yeah. Aging, sickness, death, the loss of our loved ones. Friend, this isn't the way it was meant to be.
God didn't make the world this way. Death is his and our enemy. That's encouraging to know when we face it, right? God doesn't want it this way.
Yeah. Number two, you are not alone in your struggle with sin.
I hope that this is a little bit freeing for you to hear that even the Apostle Paul struggled with sin.
We are all born with a bent towards sin, even your pastors.
Oh, man. So you should strive to overcome your sin, and we'll talk about that next week, but you don't need to beat yourself up over it.
You're not the only one with these struggles. You are not alone.
Number three, since we are bent towards sin, we cannot just follow our hearts.
Yeah, a common mantra around the world is that people should follow their hearts.
Or trust their gut.
Or just be true to themselves.
But Christian, this is not the path of Christ. God calls us to pick up our cross, deny ourselves, and follow him.
Yeah, our desires are not always trustworthy, good, and true.
We need to submit all our desires to the filter of God's word and what he says.
Yeah. Number four, this gives us an answer for why there is so much suffering in the world.
One of the major complaints people raise about God and faith is that a good God wouldn't have made a world with so much suffering.
And Christianity agrees. He didn't. The fallenness of the world is a result of the sin of mankind.
But we don't want to leave you without hope. Rather, we want you to be all the more amazed at the great redemption God offers us through Jesus.
This is why God sent Jesus to save us. We are desperately stuck in our sin. And so Jesus went to the cross to be our new covenant head, to put our sin to death and to undo death itself in his resurrection. And the day is coming when we shall inherit that resurrection just as surely as we inherited Adam's sin. Listen to the words of Revelation 21.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away.
Glory to God. Rejoice in that coming hope, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.